Huh? Oh, you could have also linked it to the thing. It's on the Academy page. Did it not launch? We have 3 people in this waiting room. Hello.
Hey there, hi there, hi there.
Hey. I'm going to pause the record. So, I wanted to start this one particularly out. It is going to be very reflective of the other communication roundtables we've done. And some of that is to make sure that as individual segments, we are looking to identify where each individual segment of Rapier is falling down on communication, as well as what is running themes that we can fix as an overall group. And I also wanted to give a disclaimer. I have been a mod for exactly not an event that I could come out of a tent. So I'm the newest one. I have the least experience in this room of mods who are mods. And I am being helped by Illaria, who is not a mod, but we still feel communication is important. And we still feel that if we look at the themes overall, it might give us a better understanding of where the problems we can focus on are. So with that in mind, we do have a lot of mods in here who, if we missay because we don't have the experience, feel free to speak up and give us a little bit more insight into what I am learning. And I'm sure at some point Illaria will be learning. So, because we're not there yet. So with that in mind, the goals and motivation for this roundtable is to review communication, find where our strengths and weaknesses are, and find better ways to communicate, find where we're falling down, because we've learned from previous roundtables, this is the #1 word people were saying we need to work on. So with that, we are focusing on that, and we are going to start here.
So we're starting with the definition of communicate. So Merriam-Webster defines it as to transmit information, thought, or feelings so that it is satisfactorily received or understood. In this presentation, one of the ways that we are communicating with you is by identifying the white slides as slides that'll tell you about what's upcoming. The purple slides are informational slides for the most part, and the pink slides are slides that are asking you for input and questions.
So transmission of information as part of that definition is going to help us narrow the scope and identify breakdowns of how the information is moving or not moving through our community, through Masters of Defense reaching out and people being able to reach the Masters of Defense with information that they need or would like to receive. So we are going to really focus on how these communications could be better and how they are breaking.
That being said, we are looking for input from the entire community, not just the MODs in this session. Communication, breaking it down into parts. First, we'd like to demystify the Atlantean Masters of Defense award structure. This is going to be very similar to those of you that attended the Order of the White Scarf meeting, because polling and things like that are pretty similar, but we have found that some people lack the understanding of that. So we wanted to make sure that everybody was starting from a baseline understanding of what that's happening. Then talk through some methods of communication and accessibility of communication.
So part of demystifying the Master of Defense and looking at the overall structure is looking at how recommendations are done, how watch lists are done, pollings, and the feedback that is generated from that.
So first off, recommendations. The mods amongst you already know this, but for those that might be watching this later, recommendations can come from anybody within the SCA. They do not require having the peerage in this case, and they can always generate discussion whenever somebody puts something forth. It can put somebody on the watch list if it gives information that was previously unheard of and helps put that candidate closer to becoming recognized. A good recommendation will always have specific details. things like they fight well is probably not as helpful as they won this particular tournament. These are the particular fighting styles they're looking at, that type of information that would be more specific to the particular person. If you don't have all of that information, giving the specifics that you do have can still be beneficial, because the peerage can fill in a lot of the other information.
And you may be giving specific details the peerage didn't know about ahead of time.
Yes.
So the mod watch list. Watch lists, as we talked about with the white scarf, are considered private information. So the fencers on this list, it is made up of fencers who are nearing a positive polling. So fencers that are starting to show promise in the right direction that a positive polling could happen, and looking at the things they are doing. It helps us track progress and ensure that there's a list of people prepared for when the time comes for polling. We have some good recommendations, and we have good reasons already established for those recommendations. A crown can add anyone to a watch list, including immediately prior to a polling. So the pollings are done so that we have a good base of recommendations for crowns and a good way to track what is coming, where we can, where we should, when it's asked for recommendations, where we can get a pool of people from.
Onto the pollings. These are also private information, and they are communications between the crown and the peerage. The peerage does the polling at the crown's request. The crown can determine who specifically is on the polling. They will often work with the principal of the peerage to identify who should be on that. Once it is initiated, each person within that peerage is able to give a yes, no, abstain choice and commentary on that. Specifically, when they vote no, there often should be put in commentary to identify issues that might need to be worked, and so that the crowns can adjudicate those responses. The peers are not required to, will not hear back on the response, whatever that is. It only goes to the crown, and then the crown can review that. They can inform the peerage of what the results are in the polling, but they're not required to. And then they will, regardless of that choice, be able to decide whether or not they want to elevate the candidate that has been polled. So the outcome of that doesn't necessarily have to contribute to whether or not they will be made. Oftentimes it does. The peerage does not have to be told if a candidate will actually be made.
Feedback. So feedback for candidates develop from these discussions on these lists. If a candidate's brought up and a peer brings up concerns with their readiness, at least for the bit that I've seen, for their elevation, the specific concerns are addressed as discussing what those concerns are. And it is often looked at to see who the best point of contact is for those concerns. And that is something that the White Scarf does as well, especially recently, to make sure that there's a discussion of who is going to be the best at addressing these concerns and who's the best point of contact. And one of the reasons we do that specifically is that we don't want to overwhelm by having everyone say all of the things to that candidate. It's usually better if it's coming from the people they are working closely with, or somebody that's particularly good at that skill.
So from this point, we are going to ask a couple of questions. And since this is a pink slide, you guys are welcome to come off of mute as soon as we have finished the questions and give your opinions here. Were there any aspects of the award process that might have been clarified by this presentation? And are there any further questions?
Most of you are already in polling orders or have been in this class, so I'm going to move right along because I'm not expecting a lot of questions. So, is this me or you? Sorry.
Me. Communication methods. Current communication, we'd like to talk about the current communication methods, the quality or inequality of said methods, and the speed of change of the different types of methods that we do have available, and then talk to people about the types of communication they prefer.
So communication is both what information you can get from the Masters of Defense and what information and how you can give it to the Masters of Defense as a group, but also as individuals. So we'll be looking at that. And among that, we've been getting people to list where you think is a good source to get and give information. So this is also, even though it's not pink, it's kind of like purple. You can take yourself off mute and give us a few thoughts on where you think information should be gained or where information is given. Not should be, but is. Anybody?
Is this an all of us thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of you just call out like a way you think that you can find information either about the Masters or be given to the Masters.
Talk to the Master of Defense.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. So depending on what you're looking for, if you're looking for information about the order as a whole, you've got, society, corpora, etc. But I have like a couple of dozen, at least, people that I'm just in regular communication with, just through like Facebook Messenger and or other similar sorts of things. At various levels of various ranks of awards, and we just talk about stuff like people.
Great. So we've got specifically talking with mods, Society Corpora, and Facebook Messenger so far.
Any other ways you could get or receive information that you can think of?
I'll repeat my comment from last time. My personal webpage has my opinions on how some of this stuff works.
And Percy just put in the chat that the OP is at least a list of everyone in the order, so it could be a good way to find out where to connect with people. So we are going to move on to what we have.
So these were the methods of communication that we identified prior to the meeting. Atlantium's Kingdom website, Atlantia's Wikipedia, Facebook has a couple different ways, university classes such as this one, roundtables that have occurred, the AED Facebook page, even though that's not officially for the MOD, there's a lot of MODs that are part of that page, at practices, events, and individual group messages, social gatherings. Also for giving information, award recommendation, and talking to the principal of the order.
Let's just go ahead to the next, because so we wanted to also discuss how not all of these methods are equal. Certainly some are more conversational, some are going to give you a more permanent official announcement type of communication. So looking at which communication is going to be sufficient for the type of communication you're looking at is another thing to consider, and that we have enough sources for the type of thing you're looking for in having communication.
So not all of these sources of information are created equal. Some are constantly updated, such as Facebook. Others are more permanent styles of communication, which are much slower to update. On the other hand, the constantly changing content can contain errors or personal opinions that may look as if they reflect an entire group, but may be more personal. And more permanent content may have a higher likelihood of being vetted. Not all of it is vetted, but certain pieces of it have more of a ability to be vetted.
So with this, we've gone over that there are lots of types of communication and also lots of methods for that communication. And we wanted you to all think about what would you like to see more of in communication and what would you like to see less of.
And what's working right now, what I may be missing. So this time, unmute yourselves, talk.
Is there any communication styles we are lacking of or that you'd like to see more of, or anything that's not being communicated that should better be communicated through a method?
Yes, Dante, this is for everybody.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, pink, purple. I can't remember which was which. And I'm not really seeing either of those colors at the moment. So, so if we're limiting the conversation to types of communication,
For the moment.
yeah, I think direct conversation is probably something that we should see more of in general, because that's where you're most likely to get, relationship building through the conversation. That's pretty critical, just overall. The more direct personal interaction everybody has with one another, the better we are at community building. One thing that I think is missing at the moment is I think we have a lot of kind of scatteredness to not just how we communicate necessarily, but what we are communicating about. And I don't know that that's appropriate for this particular slide. But one thing that I know a couple of people are trying to get going is like a web forum, because that's something where it's the kind of that mixture between the rapid pace of a constantly updating Facebook page or a constantly updating chat room or what have you. And it's not quite as slow going as, like a blog or a web page or something, but it gives that ability to both have a discussion about something that is focused and also gives the ability to cultivate one's thoughts and compose them some in a way that's better than Facebook for kind of having that patient back and forth, because you can go to a forum. The email lists used to be pretty good for this too, but
Aiden, I'm listening to this. I have to listen for an hour. No, I have to listen for an hour.
Can you mute?
Am I not muted?
You're not muted.
You're not. No, but it was hilarious.
Go ahead.
I thought he was condemning the use of video as a communication medium, which there's a lot of validity to that. So we'll bring it back on track there.
Excellent use of his child as camouflage.
So I've said my piece.
You're still unmuted. Oh, no, you are.
Well, I'm going to jump in. Shockingly, I agree with a lot of what Dante said. I'd like to see more personal interaction. There are, unfortunately, right now, a limited number of masters and a wide disparity in location of those masters. And there are whole swaths of the kingdom that don't have easy access to one of you folks right now. My area happens to be one of those. The entirety of South Carolina happens to be another of those. It is what it is. And I just want to acknowledge that it exists.
That is there any, so that is certainly a problem, and we're going to get to hopefully brainstorming solutions, but that's something that would be good to try to think about, especially with the people that are in this room right now, of how we can better do that. Except for Magic Wand, which makes everyone more extroverted, which I would totally waive if I had one. But
so in your communication methodology, one of the things that we, in our dash for inclusiveness and in our want for everybody to play the game with us, and please understand that I am a champion of that, but willingness to accept the message What is their actual question? What is their motivation? All of these things are really very important. One of the things that I had stopped doing was normalizing people's behavior so I could kind of get a read on them, and just took them at face value. And I found out for me that that was a failure. Why are they doing things? The other thing is for the half a dozen masters sitting here, Caradwin and Percy, very, very long-serving white scarves. And the rest of you whippersnappers out there, is I've always found that if we communicate by email or we communicate by text, we fail. Dante and I have had arguments on email, boom, 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 and then we stand in front of each other for less than 3 minutes and go, "Oh yeah, we agree." So I think that we have to trust, but I also think that the sender of the message, the person that wants that information, needs to understand that we're probably going to answer the question that we hear, and they may need to actually define what they want.
There is a lot to be said for if you are asking a serious question or saying a serious thing, and if you are going to take the response in a serious way, there is a lot to be said for taking time to compose what you're writing. And if it is a quick back and forth in writing, there's a lot to be said for giving people the benefit of the doubt and assuming positive intent with your interpretations of their words. Because quick writing back and forth is not a skill set that most people have when it comes to being extremely clear and precise with their words. So if you're going for something serious, slow it down, read what you wrote out loud before you hit send. Make sure it sounds the way that you think it sounds. There's a lot of stuff like that where we can get lost because one person uses an exclamation point and the other one doesn't, and they don't understand that they don't understand that some people think putting a period at the end of a sentence in a text message makes it passive aggressive or something like that. There's a lot of cultural rules around punctuation and text and things like that we're all still navigating, and some of us are in different generations of exposure to that kind of media and those kinds of methods to be able to parse.
So just to reiterate, we have looked at limitation of personal interactions, and I guess limitations of correct wording as part of what you'd like to see.
Everybody needs more English class.
All right, Dante's offering to teach everybody English classes. So
for a fee.
Everybody needs more scotch and love.
All right, so we are going to move on to accessibility of communication, which I think some of the things we've talked about might tie into nicely. So this is, again, which slide is which? My notes are missing under the slides. Are you good, Illaria?
This is yours. You're good.
Okay. Sorry about that. My notes are hiding. So accessibility of communication is how easy is it to find and use the communication offered by the mods. Some of that is knowledge that resource exists. Some of that is ability to find that resource, and some is ease of use of that resource. And that goes into a lot of what we were talking about, where you can't, if no one lives in that area, it might be less easy to use a mod as a resource. And some of those are things that are easy to fix, and some might not have a good solution. So we're gonna move on and kind of dig into that.
So knowledge of communication of a resource. Did anyone learn of a new resource to reach out to that should say mods today? And did that resource help fill a missing method of communication? Go ahead.
And what similar methods were you using previously to fill that gap? and what would have helped you consider this a resource if it is a new resource?
The conversation at this point hasn't really touched too much on resources people didn't know about. So if people have items on this, please feel free to step up and state them. You can also kind of generally understand this one in the sense of, are there resources that you think should be available that maybe aren't?
And this is a pink slide open for discussion.
None of you ever call me on the phone, please.
You want us to start?
No.
Less
No,
calling
that's a good way to get blocked.
All right, move on from the slide then.
So finding a communication resource, have you looked for the resource and been unable to find it? Clearly, Percy has looked for the resource of the mod in Windmaster's Hill, and we all keep moving on him. Sorry, friend. And where did you look for that resource?
Did you end your search at a different resource, and was it easy to find? Did it fully meet your need? Was your information need unmet? Like did you find Facebook to talk to a particular mod or something?
I-95 is a resource to get to some of those mods. That is correct. But if in lieu of that, is there another way to connect to the resources that we can work on? We are now all in separation from each other. So maybe trying to use some of the tech communications that we're starting to develop to fill some of those gaps may be a possibility. Having better connections that way for some of our areas we can't reach as easily.
So
thoughts?
We'll talk about that later.
So,
and for the non-mods, feel free to speak up too. Go ahead.
so literally when you reach, there's all of us on here right now that are older than 45 or probably multiple peers. There's a bunch of multiple peers in here. As you truncate upwards, communication becomes more narrowed about what we believe we are doing. And people are looking at us for a definitive answer about an entire group. Dante will not use the same words that Jay uses, that Lloyd uses, that Giacomo uses. I will tend to make a correction and I try to do it very, very, very politely. And once I reach the point that I can no longer do it politely, I may send them to somebody else to talk to or take them out on the field and explain why that skill that they think that they're expert at, they are not. And that form of communication may not necessarily be the best form of communication for that person. I've developed kind of personal resources as what I am, not who I am, but what I am, of handshakes with other people, of sending people to other people or bringing other people to folks I need help with. But people out there, our Scadians, want definitive answers from the mod. What is a Master of Defense of Atlantia? They don't seem to want to accept the answer that it is Giacomo, it is an Alan, it is an Adon, it is a Dante, it is a Lloyd. They don't want to hear, and sometimes I don't know that they understand that when we say high levels of skill that will allow you to do these things, they may not even have that point of communication. Many of our smaller practices in this kingdom, the instructors that are instructing in these smaller practices cannot communicate tempo, cannot communicate measure well. And without tempo and measure, you don't have a fighter. So the resource of coming to us, somehow we have to send to the populace that while we might all speak a little bit differently, the idea is make the best rapier fighters for the Kingdom of Atlantia that we possibly can, which is part of my fealty. As a group, how do we get that message out?
So Just for reference, in the previous conversation, in the AED one, we talked about a couple different ways to increase communication in general. Some of those ways ended up being ways to increase the social circle. So that may be a way that might help Percy and the folks in North Carolina and South Carolina a little bit. It's a slightly different way to have a look at these resources. But one of the things we're talking about doing was putting out an academy flag on tents that were hosted by people who were within the academy, so that people knew that they were welcome to come and share the shade and hang out. And that there might be places like putting something up on the academy website to discuss what it means when you see this flag, and giving people a card when they authorize to point them at that resource so that they know to look at it and kind of see some of the things around them. And then that way we get possibly a little bit more community building, as Dante put it, of people across cliques and across the different groupings that you might have. So you don't have to stay just within your barony or just within your shire or within whatever subgroup that you're part of. You can also intermingle with people to have discussions. So maybe that way we can share our mods from the north with more southernly people so that we can get a little bit better mix. So those are some of the ideas that have come up with through the other communication presentations that are kind of tangential to the types of things that we're talking about here.
And maybe we need to advertise more that if you have a mod symbol on, that's an invitation to come talk to you about fighting, as opposed to just wearing a symbol. And so being more verbal and more vocal and more expressive of what that symbol means, if we want people to feel like we can talk to everyone.
Especially if they don't know you.
Well, if I start to beat a dead horse too hard here, just mute me. So I'll get the hint. I think that we've done a real disservice to our community by making, by making fighting feedback something that has to be requested and not freely given. We've really done an injustice to lower level fighters or fighters that are from more isolated areas and fighters that are, that maybe don't know us that well, because for someone who is a blue scarf to put the onus on that person to go up to Giacomo or Alessandro or any of these more experienced high level guys, putting the onus on them is a really heavy burden to place on someone who is new or newer or not that skilled, and maybe sees such a gulf between where they are and where they're trying to get to. It's intimidating. And we've really hamstrung the ability of the upper levels to be able to say to someone, hey, if you're willing to give me 5 minutes of time, I can help you. I can make a big difference in your fight if you just listen to me for a few minutes. And I know, I know that there are situations where we run into that, where because of that cultural expectation, we've created a situation where people can't ask and people don't feel comfortable offering. And it makes me sad.
What makes you feel like you can't give feedback to anybody?
We've had numerous and lengthy conversations and discussions about how unsolicited feedback is like the worst thing in the world.
So
And how
what about asking people a question first?
So Dante, can I jump in sometime?
Sure.
So I've had wonderful impromptu whole practices at events in South Carolina when I was traveling all the time as the Kingdom Ranger Marshal, where they come up and say, Giacomo, lead a practice for us right on the middle of the field. Letia has been there when that's happened in North Carolina. On the other hand, if hey, I appreciate your fight. I just saw this thing. Can I help you? One, they probably don't feel like they can refuse me. Two, the message I may be sending, they may not understand. They may not have a common basis of what instruction they're receiving. Recently, I had the opportunity to fight with one of Dante's students. Great fight. And my feedback to him was, everything I say here to you right now, take it back to Dante. Because he's teaching you his words, not mine. I don't want to make confusion in your mind. A self-awareness that I might say something different or cause some kind of internal conflict as a method of communication needs to be clarified. And I don't have such a big ego that I'm not going to go to his student, I appreciate you listening to me, take it back to the master that's teaching. But finally, those people looking at us, we walk, most of the people on this meeting, by the way, if you walk into a tournament, if a caller walks into a tournament, they have a pretty good possibility of winning that tournament, period. We got our callers because we win fights. It was the manifesto of Logan and Essa when they made this order. They are fight winners, period. And that's widely known. And we can be an intimidating group. We went through this before when the white scarves were made and the nifty blue racing stripes and spike were put on the scarves. We had this same problem. We intimidate people. So Dante's absolutely correct. That reach out is often just as intimidating as can they even ask you? And we've really got to process how to, beyond the level of friendship, and this is part of the things that have caused the cliquism and very, very focused on households and blah, 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 all throughout the society, is we forget that one word, society. Is that person comfortable with us, with me, with you as the individual?
I think some of this comes down to, and maybe we'll move on after this because we only have about 15 minutes left, but some of it comes down to asking for consent before throwing advice at somebody, because it may be a bad time for advice. So just being like, can I, is it okay? Is it a good time for you? Because in the middle of the tournament, it could throw them off. So giving permission to say no is often important. And I think that's kind of the barrier that you were talking about, Dante, is we're in a culture where we can't just give advice, but asking if you can give advice is a little different than just being like, I give you this advice, you need to take it. Does that make sense?
I need a lot longer to talk through how that particular aspect of culture is interwoven into a bunch of other things that are also problematic. And so it's a compounding issue where the end result of it is stratification and a breakdown of communication across the lines, and inconsistent and often conflicting priorities about what is valued and what the unspoken assumptions are in how we are interrelating with one another. It's much more so than just, hey, do you want some advice? There's a whole that's like seeing a couple of ants and not realizing that the anthill beneath is to the tune of millions. I just I don't have time for to be able to do it justice.
Okay, well, we'll move on, and then if we have time, which you won't because you don't have enough to do justice, but maybe we can do a roundtable and focus on that as a problem. So we're going to move on to the next slide, which is ease of use as resources. And we were predominantly looking at the different things like award recommendations, Academy Facebook pages, mod roundtables, things like that. But we've kind of started focusing down on the personal relationships at this point. So unless there is an ease of use problem, we've also in other work, I was going to say workshops, but these other roundtables, we've looked at making the website easier to use and certain other resources like that so that there's more clarity there. So unless anyone wants to touch on something other than interpersonal one-on-one relationships that for ease of use, go ahead and open that floor up now. Everybody good with that? All right, moving right along. Within that, improving content. So which resources could be more useful? We've talked about people could be more useful if we can figure out a better way to communicate individually with individuals. And are there any specific resources where the content is confusing, which we've also touched on as the group? But if there's anything more to add to that, this again is a pink slide. So I'm going to give a brief pause. We're going to go through them and then kind of circle back to some of the pieces.
I have one thought about this for content improvement, and I put it in the chat, but some decades ago, Marshall McLuhan coined the phrase, "the medium is the message." And one of the things that I think is true for that and we need to be mindful of is the mechanism that we use to communicate dictates to a large degree the type of information that we can convey and how it's conveyed. This video, for example, we're all speaking off the cuff, so none of our responses are as well thought out as they would be if we wrote them. Speaking to someone in person at an event, body language and tone of voice starts to play a role. But all of the words said are ephemeral and disappear into the void as soon as they're spoken. And no conversation is remembered exactly as it was said. A picture is worth 1,000 words. All of these different things, play into, if we are going to improve our content, we need to think about the mechanisms that we are using to convey that content and make sure that if we're trying to get something across that's more complicated, there are ways to do that that are better. If we're trying to build, interpersonal relationships, there are ways to do that that work better. I know I joked, don't call me on the phone, but hearing someone's voice is a lot different than sending and receiving text messages, especially if you want to just have a quick back and forth. And that's just, that's something that I think we need to just be cognizant of.
Anybody else? So here we're going to think about the content questions you may have still regarding the peerage or communication to the mod, and which would be your preferred communication method if you still have questions that have not been answered.
This one's kind of especially aimed at those people who are not mods. So if anybody who is not a mod would like to speak up during this meeting, feel free to as well. Mods are welcome as well, just
fight me.
kind of hard to right now. We're in a pandemic, but overall, yes.
Am I actually unmuted?
You are unmuted.
I would say that the best way of communicating with somebody is in person. The second best is verbally, because you can get tone. That can be done over Zoom or Meet or, that can be done over Zoom or Meet or, hey, Jim said it, or any of those platforms. But for people that have a hard time cold calling someone, that's what text and messenger is for. Because you can make an initial reach out over text, and then you allow the person, to come back, and it's something that you initially control, rather than, feeling like you're forcing someone else to have a conversation with you that they may not be prepared for.
So I kind of have a question to the group. If we are looking at building more and more and more individual relationships, are there things that we, since a lot of us are mods in this room, can be doing other than just saying, hi, you're a new face, let's fight, or hi, you're a new face, let's talk about like your fight or questions you have? Are there things we need to be doing? Should we, you mentioned cold calling, should we start phone trees or something crazy like that? That seems a little excessive, but how do we make sure we are accessible to absolutely everyone? Like, I can only meet so many people and help contact with so many people and teach so many people. So how do I do that more is my question, because that's what we're saying. We need to be better friends. We need to be better contacts. We need to be more. How do we be more? How do I be more?
If I may, this is a problem White Scarf had. This is a problem the Knights have. This is a problem the Masters of Defense have. We go to an event. We're going to an event with our agenda, what we want to do. We're going to an event to be with our friends. We're going to an event to be social. That doesn't necessarily make us always the best chatelaine. It doesn't necessarily ensure that we are providing that largesse as befits our station. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're always doing that the right way. It doesn't mean that we always have the time to talk to everybody. But that's the problem with being the one. You are the only Giacomo. You are the only Lloyd. You are the only Dante. And you're having people come to you or be sent to you for specific reasons. But how much time do you have? And that's yeah. If you can figure that question out, we've been trying to answer it since 1993, other than being genuine.
Yeah. Time is the one thing that everybody has a hard limit on. The last year or so, I've just been skipping most of the organized activities at events to do training-based pickups with people on the side of the field. And, I still can only get to, a handful of them at most.
I was going to suggest that, if the marshals want to be clever, they can set up things to encourage that on the field. One of the things that I wanted to start trying to do was a pickup format called Teach Me a Lesson, where the more junior people are encouraged to pick a fight or challenge a more senior person, and either ask for a lesson or show them something that they know. And it was really justified by trying to get more historic martial arts out on the field at an event. But it doesn't have to be for that. It can be just to learn it, learn a new technique or get some feedback or whatever you want to do. And that's something a marshal in charge can set time aside for and encourage to make the make it more natural for people to interact with people they don't know.
And to Lloyd, to that point, it's something that's been done in the past that we haven't seen a lot of recently. We used to have dedicated times and either at universities or back when there was an event called Academy of the Rapier in Atlantia, we used to do like a section of the day that was one-on-one fighting or come fight a white scarf kind of things, where you'd have 4 or 5 white scarves standing around the field where you got 15, 20 minutes with each student.
So structuring events for more communication and one-on-one interaction would be a positive thing that could come out of this?
Pickups in general would be amazing to bring back to events.
I agree.
I desperately wish that every minute of an event was not structured activities. Because if your tournament takes, 2 hours, I might fight 8 people once or twice each. But in that same amount of time, like things like Adult Swim, like we should just do things like that more.
Fantastic example of that. It really is. Bring it down? Am I too loud?
No, bring Adult Swim south.
I mean,
because Adult Swim.
Dude, we can just make our own thing, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Southern Adult Swim. Also,
Adult Swim's like a
place to crash, Percy, and we're not in the middle of COVID for
I know, right?
Just did try that, and we got 3 mods to appear and 2 non-mods. It was, I don't know, it was a bad weekend. It was early in December.
That was fun, though.
Yeah, it was Dante and I, and what's the other one?
Adon was there.
Adon.
Yeah, and Roz came, and Joss was out, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would have been a lot nicer if we'd had a better turnout for the fencing side.
But that was at the new Ruby Joust site or Rip Up War. So it has a huge indoor space that's really pretty suitable for that.
So
if we can just get critical mass and get it going.
So if we're occasionally doing things like that, but we're not getting the turnout, how do we fix that? Because that's a different topic. If we're offering it and we're not getting turnout as well.
Some of it's location, some of it's timing. I vaguely remember that now that you guys brought it up, and it was a horrible timing thing for me. I don't remember what it was, but there was something else going on.
Yeah, I mean, and that happens.
Yeah.
To be perfectly frank, I also think that there's a discrepancy between what kind of effort level people are willing to put in and what kind of effort level is actually necessary to get to the upper levels of this. It's as hard as it might be to hear, if you're going to your practice once a week for a couple of hours and then going to an event, doing one tournament for 7 or 8 rounds, fighting 7 or 8 people, then jumping right into some long melee thing and not fighting diverse opponents, not doing pickups, not being an information sponge, not spending time outside of practice making sure that all your stuff is good. You're going to hit a ceiling, and it's not going to be a particularly high ceiling. It's the people that are, like Giacomo was referencing earlier, the people that are the tourney winners, the people that show up and have 10 plus 15 year careers of showing up in the semifinals and finals over and over again. Those are the people that take those opportunities and go and are aggressively seeking feedback, taking in as much input as possible and learning all that they can, not dabbling. And I I think that there's kind of a disconnect between how much work is really involved versus how much work people are willing to put in or think is needed.
So you're switching the onus of communication in some way, or of that this is no longer communication, but more the onus on reality of achievements needed.
Well, I don't think we do
Trying
it.
to be there and be resources. So.
Yeah, it's hard to be a resource. It's hard to be a resource if you're largely untapped.
FYI, everybody, it is 5:30 now, so if you do have a 5:30 class, this is the time that you would need to transition.
Bye, Lloyd. Did you have any final things?
I'm sorry, what was the
Did
question?
you have any final things before you head out, since you were waving like you had to go?
No, I'm going to head out. I have another class, but thanks everyone. It was helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing and running this.
You're welcome.
I'm going to head out too, guys. Thank you so much for the chat.
You're welcome.
Feel
Thanks.
free to find me on email or Facebook or whatever if you want to talk personally. I'm open to that.
Thank you. Robert, go ahead and stop the recording whenever you're able.
Yep, will do.
All right.